I'm going to quickly show you how to research an ETF using the Robinhood app because there's a lot of information that they now offer that can give you a really good quick glance as to whether or not you should be investing in that particular ETF. So let's hop on my phone really quick and I'll show you exactly how to do this research. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is just look up a specific ETF. So just click the search icon on the bottom here, and we are going to look for VOO, which happens to be Vanguard's S&P 500 index, because this has some really good numbers that we can look at. Now, the first thing Robinhood's going to do is they're going to default you to the one-day mark. Now, you can see that dot blinking right now. That's because the market is actually open and we are having a down day. We're actually down 1.91%, which is terrible. And we have had a few of those days the last week or so. So things are looking a little bit rocky right now, but that's where they're going to default you. They're going to default you on the 1 day. Now, you can also look at the 1 week, the 1 month, and you can go all the way to 5 years. Now, the reason that this information is good to look at is because you can see easily how the ETF has been performing over a certain amount of time. Now, I wish that they had longer than 5 years, but they don't. If you do want to look up that information, you can easily find that somewhere like Yahoo Finance, but Robinhood does give you 5 years. Now, the other cool thing is that you can actually click on a candlestick chart. So right next to the 5-year, we're just going to click the candlestick. And the cool thing about this is that with a 5-year candlestick chart, you can actually run this graph and you can see what all happened between different periods of time. So if you actually go back to March of 2020 when there was a huge correction, you can see that there was a 19.92% decrease over that period of time. Now, we all know that there was a huge correction in the stock market, and the cool thing is about the candlestick chart is that below the candlestick chart, you can actually see the trading volume. So you can easily see when people are buying and selling these shares based on what's happening in the market. So sometimes the candlestick view is a good way to get an indicator of what's really happening on a day-to-day or a week-by-week basis, because the longer the candlestick is, whether it's green or red, that indicates that there was a big swing within that period, whether it was up or down. So if the goal for most investors is to buy low, sell high, then obviously if you're looking at one of these basic graphs, you can tell whether you're buying high or low just based on what's actually happening when you're buying that specific ETF. Now, if you are new to the Robinhood app, you can get a free random share just for signing up with them, and it can be valued all the way up to $225. Most of the time, you're probably not going to get that high of a value, but it can happen. So if you have any interest, I do have an affiliate link in the description below. So check that out if you are new to the Robinhood app. Now let's just scroll down here and I'll show you the other information that's quite useful. Now, what you're going to find under an ETF is called What's in This Fund. And this is pretty handy as an overview because it actually tells you what's consuming the ETF. So in this case, we're talking about the S&P 500, which is basically the top 500 US companies, but they're all in different sectors. So you can see right here that technology is taking up almost 27% of the portfolio, healthcare is at 13.39, and so forth. So you can see really quickly at a glance what all is consuming that ETF. And then the other thing you can do is you can click on top 10 holdings right here on the right. And this will actually show you the top 10 holdings are taking up almost 30% of the total assets inside that ETF. And you can see right here that Apple's almost taking up 7%. You've got Amazon at almost 4%. So you can see right here, it's not like they're taking the 500 top US companies and distributing them evenly throughout the ETF. It's actually weighted quite a bit different, and you can see that right here with this basic data. Now, Robinhood used to not offer this, and that's what's pretty cool now is that you can see this basic info. Now, if you do want to see what's all inside the fund, you are going to have to do research outside of Robinhood, but this is a quick indicator to give you an idea of what's inside the ETF that you're going to be investing in. Now, if you scroll down here, we're going to look at stats. Now, there are a few things that I'm interested here when I'm looking at an ETF. One of them is going to be the AUM on the right here. This stands for Assets Under Management. And this is really important to me because I want to see how much money is actually in this fund. Now, right here, we're talking $260 billion. That's obviously a ginormous fund. So if anything goes south, you're probably not going to lose here. But if I were looking at some random ETF that only had $1 million in assets under management, then I would be really leery of investing in that ETF because I don't feel like they would have enough money to back up anything that could go wrong with the market. Now, if you look below the AUM, you're going to see the PE ratio, which honestly, when it comes to doing research on individual companies, this is important because it tells you how overvalued the stock is at a glance. But this is giving you an average PE ratio of the entire S&P 500 index being 25.73, which honestly isn't as high as I thought it would be, but it is still pretty high. So that can tell us as a quick indicator that maybe it's still a little bit overvalued. Now, if you go below the PE ratio, you're going to see the 30-day yield. This is the dividend yield, and this is averaging a 1.21% right now. So every share that you own, you're going to get paid back 1.21% as a dividend as of right now. Now, this number is going to fluctuate every single day because as the price of the ETF moves every single day, so is the dividend yield. But as an average, you can see that it's 1.21% right now. So you are going to get paid something to own this ETF. Now, the most important thing that I'm going to be looking at when it comes to an ETF is obviously their returns, but I also want to look at the expense ratio, which is right here on the left side of the stats. Now, the expense ratio is really important to understand because this tells you how much it's going to cost you to own that ETF. And 0.03% is extremely cheap. And that is why I love Vanguard products as well as Charles Schwab products, because they always have very low expense ratios. Now, what this is going to cost you is basically if you invest $10,000 into this ETF, you're going to pay a whopping $3 a year as an expense. So if you had a 10% gain in the market, then really you're going to be making a 9.97 return instead of a 10% return because of that expense ratio. Now, this is something to really consider because if you're investing a lot of money into a specific ETF, you really want to watch that expense ratio because it's taking away money that can potentially be compounding for you. So for instance, if you did find an ETF with a really high expense ratio like 1% or 1.5%, that is very expensive because over time, if you have a lot of money invested, you are losing out on that compounding power over time. So if you're looking at another S&P 500 index, let's just look up SPY here. So we're going to look up SPY. This is the Spider S&P 500 ETF. Now, if we just scroll down to the exact same thing, you can see that their expense ratio is a 0.09. So if you compare their returns versus Vanguard's returns, then you can actually compare if that expense ratio is worth paying with them or not based on the returns that they're getting. Because obviously, if you're paying half a point for an expense ratio, but their returns were exceptionally better than the one with the cheap expense ratio, then it's still better to go with the expensive one. But it usually doesn't work like that. Usually, if you're looking at an S&P 500 index, that's kind of the marker that everybody can at least hit is what the S&P 500 is doing on a yearly basis. Now back over to Vanguard's stats, if you scroll below the stats, you're eventually going to get to the average annual return, which is also handy because you can see some real numbers here. And this is also a really good way to look at these numbers and compare different ETFs based on how they've been performing over the last 1 to 10 years. So these numbers are also helpful to look at. Now, this is pretty much all the research you can do on an ETF using the Robinhood app, but at least they have a ton more information than they used to. So it's a pretty good one-stop place you can go to do some basic research on any ETFs you potentially want to invest in. So thanks for watching this video. Hopefully you guys learned something new about doing some basic research on ETFs using the Robinhood app.